The last thing Major Tamsin Ward wanted to smell for the rest of her life was bleach. It had been 3 days of it, bleach in the air, bleach in the puddles, bleach in the seams of her gloves, bleach that fought with other odors and never quite won, bleach that pretended it could make a place clean if you used enough. The demilitarization plant's decontamination corridor was a narrow throat of concrete and stainless steel. Yellow hazard striping, wet floors, drain grates that swallowed runoff, and secrets. Above, harsh lights hummed behind grated covers, turning everything the color of old bone. Ward stood under the final rinse bar while the water hit her suit in sheeted pressure. The plant workers called it the car wash. The name made it worse, like you could take the day's work off with a spray and a checklist. Across from her, Captain Jonah Pike shook his arms out like a man trying to fling off bad luck. His visor was fogged around the edges from sweat and breath, and the smear of stenciled letters on his chest, ACVD/inspection, looked like it had been stamped on as an afterthought. 30 seconds, barked the decon tech from behind the glass. Then step forward. Don't touch your seals. Touch my seals, die in agony, Pike murmured, and it came through Ward's helmet speakers as dry as dust. Ward didn't laugh. Not yet. Laughing came later, after the last glove check, after the negative pressure locker, after you'd proved to the world that your skin was still yours. The rinse bar shut off with a clunk and a sigh. Ward stepped forward on cue, boots squeaking on wet concrete. Her suit's internal fan whined harder as it compensated. In her peripheral HUD, the same green indicators stared back. Pressure stable, filters stable, seals stable. Green lights meaning not dead. At the far end of the corridor, Dr. Nia Okoye held her hands up for inspection like a surgeon, palms out, fingers spread, while a different tech waved a handheld sensor over her suit's seams. Okoye had the calm face of someone who had spent years telling panicked people what calm looked like. Beside her, Senior Chief Pavel Orlov stood like a boulder someone had learned to dress in tactical fabric. Orlov's suit looked too small for him, even when it fit perfectly, as if his shoulders were always trying to leave first. He watched the scanner sweep with a patient, professional contempt. Radiation, chemical residues, biological markers. He trusted machines. People, less so. Ward reached the inspection point and raised her arms. A decon tech, gloved and masked behind glass, spoke through the intercom like they were giving directions at a grocery store. Hold, rotate left, rotate right. The scanner's digital tone chirped. A flat beep, then another. Clear, the tech said, and the word wasn't relief, not in this line of work. It was simply the next step. The tech tapped a control. A panel on the wall opened and exhaled a soft fog, the kind of chemical neutralizer that smelled like hospitals in ruined days. Ward stepped into the fog. It clung to her suit in tiny cold beads, and for a moment in that sterile mist, the plant disappeared. Just her breathing, just the fan, just the knowledge that what they were doing, what they always did, was a ritual to convince themselves the world wasn't as fragile as it felt. The fog cleared. A final door opened. Beyond it was the clean side, lockers, benches, a line of steel sinks, paper towel dispensers, and the hard, warm smell of coffee from a machine that looked like it had been rescued from a landfill. The plant's manager, a man in a wrinkled polo who smelled faintly of disinfectant and resignation, waited with a clipboard. He held it out like it was a weapon. Chain of custody signatures, he said. Ward took the clipboard with gloved hands. The papers were sealed in plastic sleeves, corners curling. Names, dates, sample IDs, the language of accountability, designed to be read in courtrooms and committees after something went wrong. She signed, Pike signed, Okoye signed, Orlov signed with a blunt, angry line that always looked like he wanted to carve his name into whoever had made him sign it. When Ward handed the clipboard back, the manager's shoulders loosened by a fraction. So, he said, trying for casual and missing by miles, that's it? Ward looked at him through her visor. In its reflection, she saw herself in a distorted oval, a faceless helmet, a plastic shell, a person turned into a procedure. Your declared stockpile is accounted for, she said. Your neutralization process meets treaty parameters. Your waste handling meets parameters, he repeated quickly. Right. Good. Great. So we're done, Pike finished for him, unless you've got a surprise sarin cache in a broom closet. The manager swallowed like the word itself was toxic. No. Ward watched his throat work. People always look like that at the end, like they'd been holding breath for days and didn't know if they were allowed to exhale. We'll file the report, Ward said. Your compliance officer will receive an encrypted copy. You'll have 2 weeks to respond to any discrepancies, assuming there are none. There won't be, he said, too fast. Ward nodded, already moving. There was nothing else to say. The plant would go back to pretending it was normal industrial work, and the world would go back to pretending it didn't need people like her to walk into places like this and verify that the most ancient human urge to poison the other guy first was still being kept on a leash. Outside, the sun had lowered into a cold winter sky, bruised purple at the edges. The parking lot was full of idling vehicles and board security. A low fence ringed the plant like a nervous arm around a mistake. Ward's team crossed the lot in a tight group, still in partial protective gear, sample cases strapped to their backs like hard little coffins. Their escort, 3 local soldiers with rifles, and the blank eyes of people trained not to think too hard, kept pace but didn't speak. At the far end, their own transport waited. A matte black armored van with ACVD stenciled in faded white. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to be. The commission's vehicles were built to be overlooked. They loaded in silence. Sample cases clipped into locking racks. Weapons returned to mounts. PPE sealed into biohazard containers. Everything had a place. Everything had a label. Ward climbed into the front passenger seat and pulled her helmet off. Air hit her face, cold, stale, real. Her hair, slick with sweat, clung to her forehead. Her cheeks carried the faint imprint of the helmet's seals. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and tasted salt and chemical disinfectant. Pike sat behind her, boots braced, helmet still on but visor cracked for air. He smelled like sweat and plastic, and the kind of fatigue that didn't go away with sleep. Okoye slid into the seat opposite, already pulling off gloves, already in that practice mode of making her body normal again. Orlov got in last, heavy and careful, and sat with his hands on his knees like he was bracing for impact. The driver, Specialist Kira Sun, their comms and systems tech, glanced back over her shoulder. Sun's hair was cropped close, her eyes sharp. Her fingers were always moving even when she sat still, as if she was typing invisible code. Everyone green? Sun asked. Green, Ward said. Pike made a noise that meant, alive. Okoye nodded. Orlov grunted. Sun put the van in gear. The engine's vibration traveled up through the seat into Ward's spine. The plant shrank in the rear view, its fence and lights and sterile corridors becoming just another spot on a map where humans had tried to control their own worst ideas. They drove toward the base in the fading light, highway empty and dull. The sky deepened. The van's interior lights stayed low, red-tinted so it didn't ruin night vision. Ward watched her own hands as she peeled off the last layer of protective tape around her wrists, the adhesive tugging at fine hairs. Her skin was pale where the suit seals had sat. Her pulse beat steady there, indifferent. Pike's voice came through from behind her, now that his helmet was fully off. R and R, he said like he was praying. Ward closed her eyes for a second. R and R, she agreed. Orlov snorted. 3 days in a row you say that, and then someone lights a flare and says the world is ending again. Okoye leaned her head back against the wall. The world is always ending. We're just the people who show up with a clipboard and tell it to wait its turn. Ward opened her eyes and looked at her team. This was what they were. Tired professionals in a van that smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, driving away from one kind of horror to whatever came next. Her wrist unit chimed softly, a harmless sound, almost pleasant. Then it chimed again, sharper. Sun's console beeped. Her posture changed, small, immediate. Incoming, she said. Ward sat up. From? Sun's eyes flicked over a line of encrypted headers. Command. Priority channel. Put it through, Ward said. The van's cabin speakers clicked. Static rolled in, compressed, sanitized. Then a voice, clipped and controlled, filled the space. Major Ward, this is Director Havelock. The director's voice had the tone of someone who never apologized, because apology implied choice. Ward's jaw tightened without her permission. Director? Your team is cleared off-site? Yes. Good. Return to base. Do not disperse. R&R is suspended. Pike made a low sound, like a man being punched in the stomach. Ward said nothing for a beat, letting the words settle. She watched a highway sign slide by, lit by the van's headlamps. Exit 12B. Another way out. Another line on a map. Understood, she said finally. What's the mission? A pause, just long enough to confirm this wasn't a normal request. Classified consult, Havelock said. Full briefing on arrival. You will report to Secure Briefing Room 7 immediately. Bring all standard inspection kits and your security detail. Major? Yes? Bring your people sober. Sun's eyes flicked up in the rearview mirror, amused despite herself. Ward's mouth tightened. We're always sober, Director. Tonight, Havelock said, I want you angry and alert. The channel cut. For a moment, the van's hum was the only sound. Pike leaned forward between the seats. Did he just cancel my hot shower and 2-day coma? He canceled all our hot showers, Okoye said softly. Orlov stared out the window into the darkening landscape. If Havelock calls you before you even reach base, he said, it's either political theater or someone has done something very stupid. Sun's hands tightened on the wheel. Or both. Ward watched the black line of road unspool ahead like a ribbon into a place she couldn't see. Her fatigue didn't vanish. It just rearranged itself, turned into a harder shape. Sun did. Fort Gallowglass sat on a ridge above a dead strip mall and a river that ran the color of lead. It was a modern base dressed in the old aesthetics of permanence. Concrete barriers, razor wire, watchtowers with bored soldiers behind bulletproof glass. Ward's team rolled through the gate without stopping. Their plates were recognized. Their faces were in the system. The guards saluted with one hand and held a thermos in the other. Inside, the base was awake, in the way military places were always awake. Lights on, engines running, people moving through corridors like blood cells in a body that never slept. The air smelled of oil and floor cleaner and institutional coffee. Sun drove straight past the barracks and motor pool toward the secure wing. A low building with no windows and a door that didn't look like a door so much as a seam in the wall. Ward's stomach tightened in that familiar way, the feeling of stepping from the world into the part of it that didn't admit it existed. They parked in a recessed bay. The van's rear doors opened. Security detail, 2 operators assigned to them on rotation, met them there, already geared. Corporal Breach and Sergeant Lena Ramos. Their names fit their faces. Breach was big and square. Ramos was lean and unreadable. Breach nodded at Ward. Major. Corporal, Ward said. You've been told? Briefly, Ramos said. Her voice was flat. Briefing room. Ward's team moved through the secure wing's entry choke point, ID checks, biometrics, a scanner that tickled the inside of her teeth, a second door. Then the hall, lit in sterile white, lined with blank walls that made distance hard to judge. Secure, briefing room 7 sat at the end. Its door was sealed, a red light above it, a keypad, a camera that tracked them like an eye. Ward keyed in her code. The door unlocked with a soft, mechanical sigh. Inside the room was cold. Not temperature cold. Air conditioning always ran too hard in secure spaces, but emotionally cold. A table, 12 chairs bolted to the floor, a wall display currently blank, a corner camera, a speaker in the ceiling. Director Havelock stood at the far end of the table with his hands clasped behind his back. He wore the same dark uniform he always wore, no insignia beyond the commission crest, because he didn't need decoration to remind anyone who he was. His face looked carved. His eyes looked tired in a way that never reached his posture. Two other people sat at the table. One was a woman in civilian clothes with a badge clipped to her belt, intelligence liaison. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes sharp and slightly too bright. She had the posture of someone who lived on caffeine and secrets. The other was a man in a gray suit who didn't belong in military rooms. He looked like someone had dragged him out of a hotel and told him to pretend he knew what a rifle sounded like. His hands rested on the table like they wanted to sink into it. Ward clocked him and filed him under problem. Havelock nodded once as Ward entered. Major Ward, Captain Pike, Dr. Okoye, Senior Chief Orlov, Specialist's son. He didn't greet Breach and Ramos. They were furniture in this kind of room. Ward's team took seats. Breach and Ramos stood at the back wall, silent. Havelock waited until everyone was still. Then he hit the wall display remote. The screen flickered and filled with a satellite image. At first glance, nothing. A stretch of mountain and snow, dark ridge lines and valleys, white drifts like bruises. A small scar of road cut through it, faint as a pencil line. Havelock pointed at the scar. "Do you know this location?" he asked. Ward leaned forward slightly. The image had no labels, but the terrain was familiar in a way all cold, remote places were familiar. "Looks like the Karsk Range," she said slowly. The intelligence liaison spoke before Havelock could. "Correct. Northern Karsk Range, border-adjacent territory, sparse civilian presence. No permanent towns within 80 kilometers." Pike frowned. "So why are we looking at snow?" Sun's fingers tapped lightly on her knee. "That scar is a road," she said. "Not public. Doesn't show up on civilian mapping." Havelock nodded. "It doesn't show up anywhere you're allowed to look. That's the point." He changed the image. Zoomed in. The road ended at something that was almost invisible against the rock. A cluster of structures, mostly buried. A few angular rooftops. A security perimeter that looked like a faint line in the snow. Ward felt her fatigue tighten into focus. "A facility," Okoye murmured. "An undeclared facility," Orlov corrected, and his voice carried that particular mix of anger and satisfaction he always got when the world tried to hide nuclear things from him. "No registry, no treaty tag, no declared purpose." "Maybe it's just military," Pike said, though he didn't sound convinced. The man in the gray suit shifted uncomfortably. He looked at his hands as if he expected them to accuse him. The intelligence liaison clicked to another slide, a timeline. Equipment shipments increased. Personnel traffic increased. Temporary construction phase. No declared seated project. Under it, a line that made Ward's neck prickle. Anonymous tip received. Havelock spoke. "We received information 48 hours ago indicating unusual activity at this site. Not a full confession, not a neat dossier, enough to make it worth looking at." "From whom?" Ward asked. Havelock's mouth tightened. Anonymous. Pike leaned back, arms crossed. Anonymous like whistleblower? Or anonymous like someone wants us to step on a landmine? The intelligence liaison smiled without warmth. Both are possible. Ward looked at Havelock. What exactly was in the tip? Havelock nodded once, as if granting her the right to ask. High traffic, expedited logistics, specialists flown in on short rotations, equipment moved in and out under heavy security, the kind of pattern that sometimes indicates unsanctioned research. Could be, the liaison said, could be a hot lab, could be a weaponization facility, could be a decoy to make someone think it's those things. Okoye leaned forward. Any environmental signatures? Radiation? Heat plumes? Biological effluent? The liaison shook her head. No clear radiological signature. No obvious discharge. The facility is buried and insulated. Whatever they're doing, they're taking pains not to leak. Ward's mind ran through the checklist automatically. Secret enrichment, weapon-grade plutonium processing, bioweapon production in a BSL-4 suite, chemical weaponization lines. Things she knew, things she had procedures for. She didn't like the emptiness in the data. Too little signal meant either nothing or competence. So why us? Pike asked, and his tone sharpened. If this is military black, why send an inspection team? Why not send, he glanced at Breach and Ramos, people who solve problems with bullets? Havelock's eyes flicked to him. Because bullets don't prove anything in court. Bullets don't preserve evidence. Bullets create political incidents. You are the commission. You are the treaty's teeth. If this site violates the covenant, we need documentation and chain of custody. And if they shoot at us? Pike asked. Breach shifted almost imperceptibly, like a dog hearing a tone. Havelock's voice didn't change. Then you defend yourselves, but you go in as inspectors first. The man in the gray suit finally spoke, voice thin. Director, with respect. Havelock held up a hand without looking at him. Not yet. The gray-suited man shut his mouth. Ward watched him. He looked like a man who'd swallowed something sharp and couldn't decide whether to spit it out. Okoye asked, who owns the land? The liaison clicked again. A single line appeared, redacted in 2 places. Top, holder, subsidiary of... Orlov exhaled through his nose, contemptuous. Contractor. Sun's eyes narrowed. That's a lot of redaction for a simple property record. Havelock's gaze cut toward her. Correct. This is where the briefing changes from treaty enforcement to something more complicated. He looked at Ward. Major Ward, he said, your job is to assess whether this site is engaged in undeclared WMD activity. You will document. You will secure evidence. You will report. You will not broadcast anything, and you will not allow yourselves to be detained off record. Ward met his gaze. We'll need access authority. Havelock nodded. You'll have it. A sealed warrant packet with commission and defense signatures. If the people at the gate have brains, they'll let you in. And if they don't? Pike asked. Havelock's eyes did a small, tired thing that might have been amusement. Then you'll discover how much authority is worth when it meets a fence. Okoye lifted her chin. What about the site's declared function? Even if redacted, what are they telling people it is? The liaison hesitated a fraction too long, then spoke carefully. It is filed internally as advanced materials testing. Orlov barked a humorless laugh. Everything is advanced materials until it becomes a warhead. Havelock turned to the gray-suited man. Now, he said, Mr. Lorne Vass. The gray-suited man flinched at the sound of his own name. He cleared his throat. Director, Major, I'm here as a liaison for... Ward didn't blink. For the contractor. Vass swallowed. For a civilian oversight committee with interest in ensuring compliance. Pike muttered. That's a fancy way to say legal cover. Vass's cheeks reddened. I'm not. Havelock's voice cut in, calm but edged. Mr. Boss will accompany you as a civilian observer. He has access credentials that may help you get through internal doors. Ward felt immediate irritation. She didn't like civilians on inspections unless they were their civilians. Scientists and auditors who understood the difference between fear and contamination. She looked at Havelock. Director, this is a tactical insertion into an undeclared black facility. With respect, I don't need a lawyer under my boots. Vass opened his mouth, then shut it. Havelock's eyes stayed on Ward. You need someone who can identify internal signage and compartment labels without triggering a defensive response. And you need someone whose presence makes it harder for anyone to claim later that you were a rogue team staging a raid. Ward held the director's gaze. She understood the political layer. She hated it anyway. Pike leaned forward. What about local military? Escorts? None, Havelock said. Orlov frowned. None? The liaison nodded. Officially, this site doesn't exist. We're going in under commission authority without host nation support. If someone decides to make this messy, we want it contained. Small footprint. Ramos, at the back, spoke for the first time. Small footprint means we're on our own. Havelock didn't deny it. Correct. Ward drew a slow breath. She could feel the old, familiar weight settling into place, the mix of duty and dread. How soon? She asked. Havelock checked his wrist unit like the time mattered to anyone but him. Transport wheels up in 40 minutes. You'll fly to forward node Kestrel, then heli insertion to within 2 clicks of the site. Weather is marginal. Visibility low. That's good. Fewer eyes. Pike sat back and ran a hand over his face. R&R is dead. Okoye looked down at her hands, then up again, calm. It was never alive. Sun's eyes were on the satellite image. Any comms interference reported around the site? She asked. Anything weird? The liaison's mouth twitched. We've had incomplete data from that region. Could be terrain, could be deliberate. Sun nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had clicked. Ward pushed her chair back slightly. Standard kit? She asked. Havelock nodded. Standard kit, plus cold weather, plus whatever you think you need to not die. Ward stood. Her team stood with her, as if moved by the same invisible cord. Havelock's voice followed them. Major Ward. She paused. Havelock looked at her with that flat, tired intensity. Your last inspection ended clean, he said. No casualties, no surprises. Ward didn't like the way he phrased it, like he was tempting fate with vocabulary. And, she asked. Havelock's eyes flicked briefly to the satellite image again. Don't assume this one will, he said. Ward nodded once. Then she turned and led her team out of briefing room 7 and back into the base's fluorescent arteries. The armory smelled like oil and cold metal and other people's breath. It was a room built for speed, racks of rifles, cases of sealed gear, shelves of sensors and sample kits. Everything had a number. Everything had a place. If you were lucky, the world was the same. Ward moved down the aisle with a checklist on her wrist display. Pike followed with a duffel bag, tossing equipment in with practiced aggression. Sun carried 2 hard cases, comms and signal analysis, like they were her children. Orlov hauled the radiation kit, heavy and sensitive, with the careful reverence of a man who trusted physics more than command. Ramos and Breach checked weapons. Not because they expected a fight. No one ever expected a fight. They expected paperwork and reluctant compliance and arguments about access. Weapons were insurance, like filters, like seals. Ward snapped her own rifle into its case, then checked her sidearm. She never liked the sidearm. It was for when everything else had gone wrong. Pike noticed her expression. You don't like this, he said. Ward zipped a case shut. I don't like vague tips in remote facilities, she said. I don't like advanced materials on redacted paperwork. And I don't like being told to be angry and alert. Pike huffed a laugh. I'm angry. Alert is negotiable. Okoye closed her sample kit with a soft click. We should assume contamination, she said, voice steady. Even if we don't see it, if they're doing anything unsanctioned, it's because they think they can control it. People who think they can control it always underestimate what they've made. Orlov grunted. People underestimate everything. Sun slid a battery pack into her case. If comms are incomplete in the region, we need hardline redundancy, she said. Mesh nodes, repeaters, tethered drone, maybe. Ward nodded. Take what you can carry. A soft, awkward cough came from behind them. They turned. Lorne Vass stood in the armory doorway, wearing a parka that looked too new and boots that had never seen real snow. His badge clipped to his chest looked like a decorative pin. He held a slim black case in one hand, like he didn't know what else to do with it. I was told to meet you here, he said. Pike stared at him, then glanced at Ward. This is him? Ward kept her expression neutral. Mr. Vass, she said. Vass nodded quickly. Major Ward, Captain Pike, Dr. Okoye. He glanced at Orlov, then Sun, like he wasn't sure if he should address them by rank or run away. Orlov didn't acknowledge him. He was locking down a case with an audible snap, as if the sound could end the conversation. Ward nodded toward Vass's case. What's that? Documents, Vass said. Access credentials. Internal facility orientation. What I'm allowed to share. He hesitated. And a personal sidearm. Issued. Breach lifted an eyebrow in the back of the room. Pike's mouth twisted. Do you know how to use it? Vass looked offended, then uncertain. I've had training, Ramos said, flat and deadly calm. Training where? Vass swallowed. Range, controlled environment. Breach made a quiet sound that might have been amusement. Ward held up a hand before Pike could say something sharper. You stay close, she told Vass. You do exactly what I tell you. You don't touch anything unless I tell you. If we run, you run. If we stop, you stop. If you freeze, Sergeant Ramos will drag you, and you'll be grateful. Vass nodded too fast. Understood. Pike leaned closer to Ward and murmured, I'm already mad. Director got his wish. Ward didn't answer because she felt it too. The irritation, the suspicion. A civilian observer wasn't just a person. It was a complication. And complications were where mistakes lived. They packed fast anyway. Time was a weapon in the director's hands. He'd said, wheels up in 40 minutes, and that was exactly what it would be. Ward checked her team as they moved. Straps tightened, cases sealed, weapons secured, sample jars labeled. She watched how Okoye's hands didn't shake, how Orlov moved like a machine, how Sun's eyes never stopped scanning for the next failure point. Pike caught Ward's look and shrugged. We do what we do, he said. Ward nodded. We do what we do. Her wrist unit chimed. Transport call. Move, she said. The transport plane's belly was a hollow metal cave full of strapped-down gear and the quiet clink of hardware. Red netting held their cases in place like captured animals. The air was cold and dry and smelled faintly of jet fuel. Ward sat facing her team, harnessed into a bench seat that had been designed for soldiers wearing armor in fear. Pike sat beside her, knees bouncing. Okoye sat across, posture composed. Orlov sat near the rear, eyes closed, as if sleeping or meditating, or simply refusing to look at the world until it was necessary. Sun sat at a fold-out console bolted to the plane's sidewall, her gear already plugged in, screens glowing a muted green. Vass sat between Breach and Ramos, like a child between two bouncers. His hands were folded in his lap. He stared at the deck plating as if it might give him guidance. The plane's engines roared. The vibration traveled through their bones. Then the sensations shifted, weight lightened, and they were airborne, leaving Fort Gallowglass behind like a bad habit. Ward watched the red cabin lights flicker slightly as power shifted. She listened to the engine's pitch change, familiar as a heartbeat. Pike leaned his head back. "So," he said, voice loud enough to carry over the roar, "anyone want to place bets? Is it nukes, bugs, or bullshit?" Okoye's mouth twitched. "Everything is bugs if you zoom in far enough." Orlov opened one eye. "Nukes don't hide well," he said. "They radiate, they heat, they leave fingerprints." Sun's fingers danced over her console. "Unless they're not using fissile," she said. Pike frowned. "Everything is fissile. That's why you guys have jobs." Sun didn't look up. "Not everything. Just everything we've been trained to recognize." Ward felt a small, cold thread run up her spine. She didn't like that sentence. It felt like a prophecy. She leaned forward. "Sun!" she called over the engine noise. "Any signals yet?" Sun shook her head. "Still too far. But," she hesitated, then added, "I've got a persistent noise floor anomaly on the sat relay. Could be atmospheric. Could be terrain shadowing. Could be deliberate jamming." Pike rolled his shoulders. "If they jam, they're hiding something." Okoye nodded. "Or they're afraid of being seen." Vass's voice, small, threaded between engine noise. "This site is sensitive." Ward turned her head slightly. "Sensitive how?" Vass's eyes flicked up, then away. I don't have classification authority." Pike barked a laugh. "Then why the hell are you here?" Vass flushed. "I have access credentials," he repeated, as if the phrase itself was armor. "And I can identify internal labels, department codes. It matters." Orlov's voice was low. "Labels don't matter when something explodes." Ward stared at him. "Nothing is supposed to explode," she said, and then forced her voice back to calm. "Mr. Voss, you were in the briefing. You heard the same vague tip we did. You know more than you're saying. I'm not asking you to violate classification for curiosity. I'm asking because I need to know what kind of danger we're walking into." Vass's hands tightened together. He glanced at Breach and Ramos, then at the cabin camera, then back at Ward. He looked like a man trying to decide which danger was worse, telling the truth or being caught telling it. "I don't know what they're doing," he said finally, voice low. "I know the site has been drawing resources, people, equipment, and I know there are internal arguments about oversight. That's why a tip would happen. That's why you were sent." "Arguments between who?" Pike asked. Vass swallowed. "Between people who think rules are optional and people who think rules are the only thing keeping us alive." Ward held his gaze. "Which side are you on?" Vass hesitated. I'm on the side of keeping things contained." Okoye's eyes narrowed slightly. "Contained from whom?" Vass didn't answer. The plane vibrated around them. The engine noise filled the gap. Ward leaned back and let the questions sit. She didn't like unanswered questions, but she'd lived with them long enough to know they were often the only kind you got. Hours passed in the aircraft's artificial twilight. The team dozed in shifts. Ward didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her body wanted it. Her mind refused. She watched the plane's status lights, listened to the air, counted the slow minutes like rosary beads. They landed at forward node Kestrel just before dawn. The runway lights were dim and shielded, the kind of lighting used in places that didn't want to be seen from above. The cold hit them like a slap when the cargo ramp opened. It was mountain cold, thin air and sharp wind, a kind of cold that made lungs feel too exposed. Ward stepped onto the tarmac and tasted snow. The sky was a hard, pale gray. Somewhere beyond the runway, dark hills rose like teeth. A helicopter waited with rotors idling, its crew bundled in heavy gear. The pilot didn't smile. He didn't look like a man who expected a routine flight. Havelock's promise had been real. Marginal weather, low visibility. Wind shoved at their gear as they loaded. Sun clipped a mesh repeater onto her harness. "If comms go down, this is our lifeline," she told Ward. "Range isn't great in terrain, but it's something." Ward nodded. "Plant them on approach," she said. "Mark our trail. If we need to run blind, we'll need breadcrumbs." Pike hauled his rifle case into the chopper and grunted. Breadcrumbs in the snow. Cute. Ramos climbed in last, eyes scanning the horizon. Breach followed, still looking amused, like nothing could surprise him anymore. Ward didn't trust that kind of confidence, but it was useful. Vass climbed in awkwardly, face pale. Ward sat across from him and watched his hands shake slightly as he clipped his harness. "You ever done this?" she asked. Vass swallowed. "Yes." "You ever done it into somewhere that doesn't officially exist?" Vass's eyes flicked up. "No." Ward nodded. "Then listen, your fear is not unique. Don't let it make you stupid." Vass swallowed again, nodding. The helicopter lifted, and the world dropped away. They flew north over ragged terrain, snowfields, dark pine scars, bare rock, a river frozen in white curves. The rotor wash hammered the cabin, making conversation impossible except through helmet mics. Ward watched the landscape scroll beneath them like a slow, hostile film reel, the kind of terrain that swallowed people and never returned their bones. Sun's voice crackled in Ward's ear through the comm. "Signal's dirty," she said. "I'm getting intermittent bursts. Could be just the mountains." "Could be jamming," Pike replied. "Could be both," Sun said. Orlov's voice came in, blunt. "If they're jamming, it means they know we're coming." Ward didn't like that thought either. The director had wanted a small footprint, quiet entry, minimal eyes. But secrets had ears. Black sites weren't built by naive people. Ward toggled her mic. "Sun, can you get anything from the site itself? Heat? Power? Emissions?" Sun hesitated. "Nothing clean, but I'm getting a faint beacon pinging on a private frequency. Low power, like a maintenance signal." Ward's stomach tightened. "From the facility?" "Maybe. It's bouncing weird, hard to triangulate." Okoye's voice cut in, calm. "Could be a decoy. Could be a cry for help," Pike said. Orlov snorted. "Black sites don't cry for help. They bury their mistakes." Ward stared out the helicopter's narrow window. Snow and rock and pine. No people. No roads. Then Sun's voice again, quieter. "Major, there's another thing." Ward's thumb tightened on her mic switch. "Speak." "I'm getting flickers," Sun said. "Not like normal interference, like the signal's folding, echoing in places it shouldn't, like it's bouncing off extra layers." Pike's voice came sharp. "Extra layers of what?" Sun didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's just wrong." Ward felt her fatigue finally vanish completely, burned away by something colder. "Mark our approach," she said. "Drop a repeater node as soon as we can." "Copy." The helicopter banked, and the terrain below rose. A ridgeline appeared through low cloud like a spine. The pilot's voice came through, distorted by the comm. 2 minutes to drop. No landing at the site. Orders are to put you down at the last safe terrain and get out." Ward toggled her mic. "Why no landing?" The pilot's voice was clipped. "Because there's no clearance. And because there's debris on the pad." Ward's pulse spiked. "Debris from what?" "Don't know," the pilot said. "Just know it's there. And I'm not putting my bird on it." Pike muttered. "That's comforting." Ward checked her team automatically. Harnesses, weapons, cases, cold weather seals, everything in place, everyone ready. Vass looked like he might throw up. Ward leaned closer to him, voice low. "Breathe," she said. "You don't get to panic until we're dead." Vass nodded, eyes wide. The helicopter dipped lower. The rotors beat the air into violence. Snow swirled outside the window like ash. Then, through a break-in cloud, Ward saw it. A facility carved into the mountainside like a wound that had been stitched with metal. A perimeter fence half buried in drifts. Guard towers that looked blind. A road leading to a main gate, wide enough for heavy trucks, now blocked by drifts and something darker piled against it. Structures clustered near the entrance. Low buildings with flat roofs, antennas, a pair of thick vents that rose from the ground like buried lungs. No lights. No vehicles moving. No visible personnel. The place didn't look abandoned exactly. It looked held still. Ward felt a strange, irrational urge to check her dosimeter, as if the sight alone could be radioactive. Her comm crackled. Sun's voice came thin. "That's it," she said. "That's the beacon source. It's definitely there." Pike's voice came in, tense. "Looks quiet." Okoye murmured, "Too quiet." The pilot's voice, 30 seconds, stand by." The helicopter flared over a patch of rocky ground a little over 2 kilometers from the perimeter. Snow whipped into a white blur under the rotors. The door slid open, and cold knifed into the cabin. Ward stood, shouldering her rifle and her pack in one practiced motion. She glanced back at her team, her people. "Same rules," she shouted over the rotor roar. "We go in as inspectors. We document. We don't touch what we don't have to touch. And we do not," she locked eyes with Pike for emphasis, "turn ourselves into heroes." Pike nodded once, grim. Okoye's gaze was steady. Orlov's jaw was set. Sun's fingers tightened around her repeater node. Breach and Ramos moved like silent machines. Vass stumbled to his feet, face pale. Ward grabbed his harness strap and yanked him forward. "Move," she said. They jumped into the snow and rock, boots crunching, wind biting exposed skin. The helicopter lifted away immediately, as promised, its roar fading into the cloud like a retreating predator. Silence rushed in behind it, huge and cold. Ward stood for a moment, listening to nothing but wind and her own breathing. Her team gathered in a tight cluster, rifles low but ready, packs heavy with the tools of their trade, detectors, swabs, vials, cameras, evidence bags, tools built to find invisible threats. Ward stared at the facility in the distance, a black scar on a white mountain, a place that wasn't supposed to exist, sitting very confidently in the real world. They started toward the fence line, leaving their boot prints behind like a trail of signatures on blank paper. And the facility watched them, silent as a closed mouth. The facility didn't look like anything. That should have been the first clue. From the air, it was just geometry pressed into a bad stretch of land. A clean rectangle of concrete half swallowed by rock. A few vent stacks, a low admin block with windows too dark to reflect the sky, and a perimeter fence that ran a careful loop around nothing that should exist. No flags, no signage, no power glow. Just a place that had learned how to hide by being boring. The transport set down in a basin of crushed gravel outside the outer fence. Rotor wash kicked dust into the air and slapped it against the chain link in dry waves. Beyond the fence, the compound lay still, the kind of stillness that made a trained person stop listening for sound and start listening for absence. Lead stepped off first, boots crunching. The team followed in practice spacing, close enough to cover, far enough that one mistake wouldn't take them all. They were dressed for the wrong kind of nightmare. Their kit was built for material threats: radiation, spores, aerosolized death. Their instruments were tuned to things that could be measured with familiar units: Their procedures assumed the enemy followed chemistry and physics the way everyone agreed it should. They've been sent because of patterns, unusual traffic, shipments routed through clean intermediaries, a steady movement of high-end equipment and credentialed people to a location that didn't exist in any of the normal systems. Not a smoking gun, not a confession, just enough of a shadow to justify putting a small team on a helicopter with sealed cases and hard questions. Lead paused at the fence line, eyes tracking the compound like she expected it to blink. "Comms?" she asked. Sparks lifted a hand to her headset, listening to the carrier noise like it was a sea show. "Line of sight is fine. Sat relay is ugly. Lots of interference. Not jamming, exactly. More like the air is full of static that doesn't know why it's here." "Radiological?" Lead asked. Doc raised the sensor wand, watching the numbers settle. "Background, slightly elevated rock. Nothing artificial." "Bio?" Tu asked. Doc shook his head. "Nothing living where it shouldn't be. No spore alarms, no volatile organics. It smells like dust." Brick, the security element's point, stared through the fence at the main gate. "Where's the welcome party?" "Maybe they got the same tip and decided to leave," Latch said, already checking the breaching pack on his chest rig like it was a comfort object. Lead looked at the gate and saw what Brick saw. It was closed. It wasn't secured. The chain that should have cinched it tight was hanging slack, as if someone had unhooked it and then thought better of going through. A padlock lay on the ground, intact, not cut. A choice made in a hurry, then abandoned. Lead's skin prickled. "On me," she said, slow, eyes on everything. Latch went to the gate, lifted the slack chain, and pulled. The gate swung open with a soft, reluctant groan. The sound traveled too far. Inside the compound, a service road led to the admin block and then dipped toward a larger structure built into the hillside. A wide, low mouth in the rock, framed with thick concrete and a pair of blast doors that looked like they belonged to a different century's paranoia. A sign should have been there, restricted, authorized personnel only, something to hang the fear on. There was nothing. The team moved in. They passed rows of parked vehicles, utility trucks, a couple of armored vans, a forklift sitting with its forks half raised as if someone had stood up in the middle of a job and walked away. One truck's driver door was open. A coffee cup had fallen into the gravel and shattered, dried brown stain bleeding into dust. No footprints in it. No fresh tire tracks. The place hadn't emptied yesterday. It had emptied long enough ago for wind to start erasing evidence. Lead stopped beside a flatbed that had been loaded with equipment crates. The crates were wrapped in shock foam and marked with shipping codes that were mostly redacted, but the pictograms were enough. Cryogenic, high voltage, optics, magnetic field hazard, not hot cells, not pathogen containment. Something else. Sparks leaned in, snapping photos. These are bleeding-edge shipments, not the kind you move unless you have a budget that doesn't have to explain itself. Doc's face had the pinched look he got when his categories didn't fit. No biohazard labels, no radiological transport tags. This isn't our kind of bad. Brick pointed his rifle toward the hillside entrance. Then why are the blast doors built like a bunker? Lead stared at the doors. Because someone expected something worse than inspectors. They reached the admin block first, standard procedure. That's where logs lived, where people sat, where you found a receptionist who could either stonewall you or beg you. The admin block was dark. The main door was unlocked. It opened at a touch. That felt wrong in a way that made Lead's mouth taste metallic. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, but not from running climate control. More like the building's bones held on to cold because no one had been heating it. Their suit lights cut narrow cones through dust. The lobby was painfully normal. An empty desk, a wall screen frozen mid-loop on a corporate safety video, a potted plant dead in its pot with leaves curled inward like hands. Then Lee's flashlight beam slid across the wall, and she saw the first sign that normal had died here. A scorch line. Not a burn, not soot. A long, clean arc of darkness along the paint, as if the wall had been kissed by something hot and very precise. It wasn't random like a fire. It was shaped. A curve, part of a circle. Doc stepped closer, not touching, eyes narrowing. That's thermal damage. Sparks frowned. From what? There's no power. Latch pointed at a nearby door. That one's been forced. The door frame was bent outward, not pried, not blown. Bent like someone had pushed from the inside until metal gave. Lee's eyes tracked the bend and kept going, down the corridor, where more of those dark arcs decorated the walls. Partial circles, crescents, repeating at odd intervals like a stencil someone had forgotten to finish. It looked like the building had tried to draw something and lost the pen halfway through. Brick shifted his weight. I don't like art. Lee didn't answer. She was listening. Not for footsteps, for the building's silence, for the way their breathing sounded too loud, for the faint, almost subliminal sensation that the air pressure was different in some places, like walking through a shallow pool you couldn't see. Find power, she said. We need cameras, logs. We need to know what we're walking into. They moved deeper through admin. Offices sat half-finished, paper stacks, personal items, a jacket left on a chair. A whiteboard in a meeting room still held a schedule, written in crisp block letters. Aperture test, 0900. Field stability, 1030. Safety review, 1020. The word aperture sat there like a foreign object in a familiar room. Doc stared at it. Aperture for what? Sparks ran a hand over the board without touching the ink, reading the other notes underneath. No destination. No assumption holds. Do not exceed. The last line had been scrubbed hard enough to scar the surface. Tu's voice went low. They were worried about something. Brick snorted. Everyone in black sites is worried about something. Lead kept moving. They found the security office in the main terminal. It was dead. No lights, no hum, no standby flicker. Whoever shut this place down had done it clean. Sparks popped the side panel off with her multi-tool and whistled softly. This isn't a standard building system. This is custom, military grade, and it's been hard-killed. Hard-killed by who? Tu asked. Sparks angled the flashlight beam deeper into the panel. By someone with access, or by someone with enough time and fear to rip the guts out. Doc's sensor chimed softly. He looked down, then up. I'm getting localized EM distortion. Lead's shoulders tightened. Where? Doc moved the wand, tracking it like a metal detector. Everywhere, but stronger toward the hillside. Toward the blast doors. Lead made the decision before she fully admitted she'd made it. We go to the main structure. Brick's visor reflected the narrow tunnel of light. You think that's where the answers are? Lead's jaw tightened. I think that's where the reason is. They crossed the compound again under a sky that felt too wide. Dust clung to their boots. The air tasted of nothing. Even the sun felt uninterested. At the blast doors, Latch examined the seam. Manual wheel, no power assist. Thick as my forearm. Locked? Lead asked. Latch tried the wheel. It turned. Not easily, but it turned, grinding against seals that hadn't moved in too long. The door's internal dogs clunked one by one, as if waking up and remembering their job. The blast door opened on a corridor sloping down into rock. A breath came out. Cold, dry, with the faint smell of ozone and old metal. Doc's eyes narrowed behind his mask. This air's been scrubbed. Sparks leaned in, her flashlight beam catching on the floor. The corridor wasn't dusty like admin. It was clean in a way that made Lee's stomach twist. Not polished, not maintained. Clean, like something had moved through and taken the dust with it, leaving only the heavier grit behind. "Stay sharp," Lead said, but the words felt too small. They descended. The facility swallowed them slowly, layer by layer. The walls shifted from concrete to composite panels. The corridor widened. Doors branched off like arteries. The first lab they entered made Lead forget the word centrifuge entirely. It wasn't a lab so much as a cathedral built for energy. Superconducting coils the size of trucks lay in cradles, wrapped in insulation and frost. Banks of capacitors sat along one wall in neat ranks like coffins, each one labeled with warnings about discharge time and lethal voltage. Laser optics assemblies were mounted on rails with micrometer precision. An array of sensors clustered around a central test bay like hungry insects. And in the center of it all, a ring. A circular apparatus taller than a person, braced by struts and wrapped in cable and coolant lines. Its surface was scorched in the same clean arcs Lead had seen in admin. The scorch pattern wasn't random. It was symmetrical. It was intentional. Sparks stepped closer, eyes wide despite herself. This is exotic. This isn't power research. This is weaponized field engineering. Doc's sensor wand started to chirp in short, unhappy bursts. "Talk to me," Lead said. Doc's voice was tight. "It's not radiation, it's field noise, like the air's been bruised." Brick moved around the ring, scanning corners and shadows like he expected a shooter. Instead, he found something worse. A set of suits lay in a heap near the far wall. Full-body lab suits with integrated respirators, the kind used in clean rooms. They were crumpled like shed skins. Their helmets were intact. Their suits were unzipped and empty. Brick stared at them for a long moment, then spoke into the team channel like he didn't trust his own voice. "Lead, we've got abandoned PPE, no bodies." Latch moved in, crouched, and looked without touching. "No blood." Sparks swallowed. Then where did they go? Lead stared at the suits and remembered the curved scorches on the walls. She didn't say it out loud yet. Saying it would give it weight. Instead, she pointed. "Find the control systems." Sparks and two moved to a bank of consoles. Dead. No power. Only dark glass reflecting their own helmet lights back at them. "Everything is offline," Sparks said. "If they had an incident, they cut the whole place to prevent something." Doc's voice came quiet. "Or the cut happened because the incident cut it for them." They moved through labs, each one stranger than the last. A chamber with thick, transparent panels lined in gold mesh, like a Faraday cage designed to hold lightning. A room full of high-speed cameras aimed at a central platform that now held only a circle of blackened floor, smooth as glass. A corridor whose walls were etched with those same clean arcs, repeated again and again in different sizes, as if someone had tried to open circles in the metal and failed. The deeper they went, the more the building's geometry began to feel subtly wrong. Not impossible, just unreliable. Distances felt inconsistent. A hallway that looked 20 meters long took too many steps. A corner turned sharper than it should have. Sparks muttered once, "Are we looping?" and then fell silent like she was afraid the building would answer. They found the first human sign of panic in an equipment bay. A rack of hard cases left open, foam inserts empty, as if someone had grabbed whatever they could carry. A wall-mounted phone dangled off its hook, its cord stretched and snapped. A set of keys lay on the floor, still attached to a badge. Lead picked up the badge with 2 fingers and angled it into the light. No name, no photo. Just a symbol, a circle bisected by a thin line. A stylized aperture. Doc's voice was soft. That's not a corporate logo. Sparks nodded slowly. That's a project mark. Two's posture tightened. A classified project. Lead's eyes lifted to the corridor ahead, where a heavy door sat sealed with a wheel lock and a warning stencil in faded red. Field containment. Authorized access only. Underneath, someone had scrawled something by hand, sharp and desperate enough to gouge into the paint. It went somewhere. Lead felt her throat tighten. Brick read it and blew out a slow breath. That's not what you write if your experiment did what you wanted. Or, Doc said, voice thin, it's exactly what you write if your experiment did what you wanted and then did something else, too. Lead looked at the door. Latch. Latch stepped forward, hands on the wheel. If this is sealed, there's a reason. We're here because of reasons, Lead said. Open it. Latch turned the wheel. The lock dogs clunked. The door sighed open, slow and heavy, like it resented being asked. Cold air spilled out, drier than anything they'd felt above. Sparks' light cut into the room beyond, and for a second, Lead's brain refused to categorize what she saw. The chamber was enormous, high ceiling, reinforced walls, thick cable bundles running like veins into a central apparatus. The ring was bigger here, not the size of a person, the size of a vehicle. It stood on a reinforced base, surrounded by shielding panels and sensor arrays. The floor around it was scorched in concentric circles, dark arcs repeating like ripples in burned paint. At the center of the ring was a test platform, and above the platform, a space where something should have been. Not an object, not an absence like a missing chair, an absence like a missing piece of the room. Lead's light passed over it and did something wrong. The beam didn't reflect correctly. It didn't scatter. It seemed to bend around a point in the air, as if the air had thickness there, as if a lens existed where nothing existed. He lowered it quickly, eyes wide. That's not EM, that's everything. Sparks whispered, is that a field? Two's voice came clipped. Or a hole. Lead stepped forward until she felt the subtle shift in pressure against her skin under her gear. Not wind, not airflow, a push, as if the room was breathing in through that point. The hair on her arms rose under fabric. Brick raised his rifle without thinking. Lead, we shouldn't be in here. Doc swallowed. The readings, there's no radiation, but the air chemistry is off, like it's being filtered by something that wasn't a filter. Sparks' light trembled as she aimed it at a console bank on the far wall. There's a control station. If we can power it. A sound came from deeper in the chamber, behind the ring. Not a growl, not a scream, a soft, metallic scrape, like something heavy shifting against the floor. Brick froze. You hear that? Lead held up a fist. Everyone went still. Silence returned so quickly, it felt like a lie. Then, faintly, from the far end of the chamber, a slow tap. Metal on metal. Once. Then, nothing. Lead felt her own heartbeat in her throat. Keep moving, she said, forcing calm into her voice, like she could inject it into the air. We get what we need, and we get out. They crossed to the control station. The console was dead, but the drawers beneath it were stuffed with printed binders, old-fashioned physical copies, because someone had known that computers could fail or be erased. Sparks flipped one open, scanning the heading with her light. Project Null Lance. Obtiv. Localized Aperture Generation. Intended terminus. Null manifold. Non-place. Her mouth went dry. Doc leaned in, reading over her shoulder. Null manifold. Two's voice was low. A hole that goes nowhere. Lead stared at the words. Non-place. A clean weapon by definition, because it left nothing behind. Sparks kept reading, voice tight as she found the handwritten addendums. Field stability good. Destination confirmed. None. No echo. Then, later pages, the handwriting changed. Messier. Faster. Echo detected. Not possible. It pushes back. Lead spine felt like ice. Brick shifted. Okay. That's enough reading. We pull out, report, and let someone with... Sparks cut him off. Eyes locked on a final printed report clipped to the binder, stamped with a red seal. Breach event. Containment failure. Entity presence. Possible. The word entity sat on the page like a stain. Entity, Brick echoed, voice flat. Like biological. Doc shook his head. Not biological. Not in our category. This is... We don't know what we let in. Lead's jaw tightened. We still don't have digital logs. We need to know what happened and where everyone went. Two looked at the dead console. We need power. Sparks nodded once, reluctantly. We bring the facility up enough to pull the archive. Then we shut it down again. Brick stared at the shimmering wrongness in the center of the chamber. And if bringing power back up wakes something up? No one answered immediately. Because the answer was already in the room. Lead forced herself into procedure. We're not leaving blind. Find the power distribution. Sparks, two with me. Brick, latch, set perimeter. Doc, keep those sensors hot and call out changes. They moved out of the aperture hall and into adjacent service corridors. The deeper levels were colder, quieter, more insulated. The facility's guts. They found the power room behind two sealed doors and a manual lockout that had been flipped to off with a decisive, final motion. A handwritten tag hung from the lockout, taped on with shaking urgency. Do not restore. Underneath, lockdown triggers on power-up. Two exhaled. So someone knew. Sparks swallowed. Or someone found out. Lead stared at the lockout. Her instinct screamed at her to leave it alone. Her duty screamed back. Restore minimal, she said. Just enough to get the archive. Sparks looked at her like she wanted to argue, then didn't. That was why Sparks was here. She questioned, but she obeyed. They worked quickly. The power room was a tangle of high-end systems, battery banks, capacitors, cryopumps, insulated conduits running toward the deeper structure like veins feeding a heart. The central breaker panel was not a breaker panel in the normal sense. It was a control rack with labeled modules and interlocks. Sparks found the startup procedure printed and laminated on the wall, because even secret programs needed manuals. Her voice went quiet as she read, Restore auxiliary, verify containment interlock, verify aperture chamber status, then... Her fingers stopped. Lead leaned in. Then what? Sparks tapped the line with her glove. If aperture status unknown, automated containment initiates. Two's voice was flat. Lockdown. Doc, over comms from the hall, said, Lead, my readings just spiked, like the building heard you thinking. Lead's eyes didn't leave the panel. Sparks, can we bypass containment initiation? Sparks hesitated. If the code isn't here, no. And if it is, it's going to be behind a system that's offline. Meaning we need power to get the code, Two said, bitter. Brick's voice came over the channel, tight. Perimeter's quiet, too quiet. Latch added, we've got scratches on the corridor wall out here. Fresh, like something dragged metal. Lead felt cold settle behind her ribs. She looked at Sparks. Do it. Minimal power. The second the archive is live, we pull, and we cut power again. Sparks nodded once. Her hand hovered over the primary switch like it was a trigger. Then she flipped it. The facility woke, like something taking a breath after pretending to be dead. A deep thrum rolled through the deck plates. Lights flickered in the ceiling, stuttering from dark to sickly amber to full white. Fans spun up in distant shafts with a rising whine. Somewhere far away, a pump engaged and began cycling in slow, heavy beats. The air changed. Not temperature, texture. Lead felt it on her skin, the pressure equalizing, the subtle shift of systems resuming, the sense of a building becoming an environment again. The control rack in front of them lit up in cascading lines of status text. Sparks' eyes snapped across it. Aux online, core online, containment interlocks. A siren cut through the facility. Not a fire alarm. Something lower, slower, more deliberate. A voice followed, synthetic and calm, speaking through ceiling speakers that had been silent for who knew how long. Containment protocol initiated. Sparks' face went white. It's doing it automatically. Unauthorized personnel detected. Two swore. That's us. Aperture status. Unknown. Lead's stomach dropped. Lockdown in 5, 4. Brick's voice slammed into the channel. Lead! Doors are moving. Blast doors are closing. Lead snapped. Move! Back to the main corridor, now. They ran. Not a sprint. Gear and discipline kept them controlled, but fast enough that boots hammered metal decking and the sound echoed like gunfire. Behind them, the power room doors began to close with a heavy, hydraulic groan. Lead threw herself through the threshold, Sparks and 2 at her heels. The doors slammed shut behind them with a bone-deep thunk. The corridor lights shifted to red. Emergency strips lit along the floor, turning everything into a submarine nightmare. Far above, the facility's surface blast doors began to seal. Lead could feel it in the vibration through the rock, massive mechanisms engaging. Over the speakers, the voice continued, calm as a lullaby. Lockdown engaged, all exits sealed. Sparks panted, hands already flying over her tablet as she tried to interface with the now awake system. It's locking the network too. It's Jesus, it's shutting off external comms. Of course it is, 2 snapped. Containment means nothing leaves. Lead hit her comms. Brick, status, static. Then Brick's voice, distorted but present. We're cut off from the main corridor. Doors drop between us. We're in a service loop near the aperture hall. Latch came through too, breath hard. We've got a manual wheel door, but it's locking on its own. It's... A sound interrupted him. A deep, wet impact somewhere nearby, like something heavy hitting metal. Then silence. Latch? Lead snapped. A pause. Yeah, Latch said, but his voice had changed. Tightened. Thinner. Something moved. We didn't see it, we just felt it. Doc's voice came, strained. Lead. My sensors are going insane. The aperture, whatever it is, it's reactivating. Lead's blood went cold. Reactivating how? Doc swallowed audibly. Like it's opening. Or trying to. The facility voice cut in again, and for the first time it sounded less like a building and more like a prison. Entity presence. Detected. Sparks froze mid-keystroke. It knows. Lead's spine tingled with the same wrong pressure she'd felt near the aperture hall. Only now it seemed to travel through the ducts and conduits like a ripple moving through water. Somewhere deeper in the facility, something answered the lockdown. A long, slow scrape, metal against metal, traveling through the structure like a fingernail dragged along a coffin lid. Brick's voice came through, barely controlled. Lead. What? Lead demanded. Brick swallowed hard enough that Lead heard it through comms. We're not alone in here anymore. And as if to underline his words, the corridor lights ahead of Lead flickered once, just once, like something very large had passed between the power and the world. Then the doors behind her sealed with another, final, hydraulic thunk. There was no way out, only deeper in. The lights came up in a staggered cough, one bank at a time, one corridor at a time, fluorescence spitting into life with a high, electrical whine that made everyone flinch, because in a place that had been dead dark, any sound felt like it belonged to a throat. The inspection team stood in the control alcove, where they'd forced power back into the building's veins. The tech's fingers were still on the breaker box. The portable generator still vibrated in the corner like a captured animal. Old screens, black for hours, now showed smeared boot sequences and green text running too fast to read. Then the facility answered. A klaxon tore through the walls, flat, relentless, too loud to be an accident. The ceiling lights snapped from sickly white to emergency red. Every monitor flashed the same message in the same austere font. Containment protocol engaged. Facility lockdown. Level eclipse. All personnel report to safe zones. Bio/nuke. Inspection status. Unrecognized intrusion. Classification. Hostile. Doors slammed shut in sequence. A chained thunder rolling through the complex. Somewhere deeper, a heavy blast door sealed with the slow, final sound of a vault. In the corridor outside, indicator strips switched from green to amber to solid, stubborn red. The team lead, call sign Lead, felt the hair rise under her collar, a cold prickle that had nothing to do with temperature. Switch, she snapped at the tech. Tell me that's not us. Switch stared at the panel he just revived. His face was washed crimson by the emergency lighting. It's not the breaker box doing that, he said. He swallowed. That's an automated response, system-wide. Sarge, the team's NCO, broad-shouldered, practical, keyed his radio. Base, this is Cinder Team. We've got lockdown engaged. Repeat, lockdown engaged. We are inside the facility. Static. He tried again. Base, copy, we are... The radio hissed and spat like it was chewing grit. No voice, no tone. Doc, the medic, lifted his wrist sensor, the one meant for counting invisible death. No radiation spike, he said reflexive. No chemical alerts. No, nothing. It's just doors. Not just doors, Lead said, because the air had changed. Not in a way the filters could flag. Something subtler. Pressure shifting as vents rerouted, a faint deepening hum in the walls. The building wasn't simply lit now, it was awake. A machine taking inventory of its own guts and finding strangers. And then, like the facility wanted to make sure they understood the hierarchy, a voice came out of the overhead speakers. Neutral, female, not quite human in its time. Containment protocol active. Unauthorized personnel detected. Movement restrictions enforced. A pause, too long to be comfort. Do not attempt to exit. Do not attempt to access restricted modules. Remain calm. Sarge's mouth twisted. Yeah? Sure. Breach, EOD, and entry specialist walked to the corridor door they'd come through and slapped the manual release. The panel flashed red. He tried again, harder, as if force could convince a lock. Nothing. Lead's eyes flicked to the corridor beyond the glass strip window. Red light, empty hallway, the kind of emptiness that felt staged. Okay, she said, voice steady because that was her job. We go back to the entrance route, find the primary security desk. There'll be a manual override. There's always a manual override. Switch gave her a look like he wanted to believe her. Doc didn't bother. His gaze had caught on something else, a pattern of scarring on the wall near the door seam. dark streaks like something had been dragged along the metal. He leaned closer, frowning. That wasn't there when we came in. Lead followed his eyes. The streaks were fresh, glossy in the red light. Not rust, not old burn. Something that looked too wet to be paint. "Don't touch it," she said automatically. Breach was already stepping around it, wary now. They moved into the corridor as a unit, because they always moved as a unit when the situation wasn't understood and the building had started talking. Half a corridor down, they hit the first real problem. A new door that hadn't existed before. Not physically manifested, no. The door had always been there, but it had been open. Now it was shut, sealed by a thick steel shutter that had dropped out of the ceiling like a guillotine. A small window in the shutter showed the next hall beyond. Beyond that glass, a smear of black on the floor. Switch angled his light. "That's oil?" Doc's voice went thin. "No." They all knew what it looked like. None of them wanted to say it, because saying it gave it an address. Lead knelt, bringing her lens up, enhancing. It was blood, but not in a pattern that made sense for a normal injury. Too much in one place, and too little where it should have trailed. As if someone had been there, and then someone had stopped being there without the courtesy of leaving the normal mess behind. Something thudded, far away. Not a door, not a vent fan. A slow, heavy impact. Then another. The team froze, all breathing suddenly too loud. Another thud. Closer, maybe, or the same distance, with the building carrying sound strangely. Sarge leaned in, voice low. "That's not the lockdown sequence." Lead looked at Switch. "Can you pull a map from the system now that it's live?" Switch was already peeling a wall panel open with a multi-tool, exposing a service port like a nerve. He jammed in his tablet and waited for the handshake. The port rejected him instantly with a sharp chirp. "Access denied," the tablet displayed. "Credential required." Switch's jaw tightened. "We're not recognized. We're flagged as hostile. The system's not going to help." Lead's mind ran through options fast, cold, procedural. Protocol said, when locked in, find the core. When the core won't speak, find the human override. When there are no humans, make one. "We need to find the security office," she said. "There'll be a key card, a manual wheel, something." "And if there isn't?" Breach asked. Lead glanced down the corridor where the red light pooled and the building's hum deepened. "Then we make a door." Sarge nodded once. "Move." They took the alternate corridor to the left, the one marked maintenance in faded stenciling. It should have been the boring route. It was narrow and lower ceilinged, all exposed conduit and grated floors. It smelled like dust and stale coolant. Doc wrinkled his nose inside his mask. "We're getting closer to something electrical, high-voltage systems." Switch didn't look back. "You wanted an exotic energy weapons lab," he muttered. "Smells like one." They passed a window set into the wall that looked into a larger room. Inside was a cavernous lab bay, its far wall vanishing into darkness. The emergency lights barely reached, but the room was not empty. There were rigs, tall, skeletal frames of metal and ceramic. Thick cables like hoses feeding into a central apparatus that looked too clean, too expensive, too purposeful to belong in a facility no one was supposed to know existed. At the center sat a ring. Not a simple ring, a nested assembly of concentric arcs, each one lined with crystalline nodes that caught the red light and threw it back wrong. The geometry of it made Lead's eyes slide, like her brain wanted to refuse the shape. Switch stopped, staring. Jesus. Sarge's hand tightened on his rifle. That's the weapon. Doc's gaze flicked to the floor. And someone used it. Because the floor was scored, not by fire, by absence. A perfect curved gouge that looked like a piece of reality had been scooped clean out of the concrete and then put back wrong. Lead watched the ring for a long moment. The ring wasn't lit, but it felt expectant, like it didn't need power to remember what it did. "Keep moving," she said, forcing her voice to stay sharp. "Eyes up. We don't have time to admire the monster-making machine." Breach snorted. "Hope that thing stays off." As if the building heard him, the overhead speakers clicked. "Containment status compromised." The voice didn't sound worried. Machines didn't worry. It sounded like it was reading a grocery list. "Anomalous presence detected." Switch's head snapped up. "What presence?" No answer. Just the next line. "All internal doors sealed. Purge cycle pending." Doc cursed. "Purge cycle? Like gas purge?" "Or vacuum," Breach said. "Or fire." Sarge leaned close to Lead. "We can't sit in a corridor waiting for the building to decide which flavor of sterilization it likes." Lead nodded. "We find the security office now." They moved faster. And then, without warning, the building went quiet. Not the hum, that stayed, a deep vibration in the bones of the place. But the alarms cut. The klaxon died mid-wail. The red lights remained. Silence hit like pressure. In that sudden hush, they heard something else. A faint scrape. Not the metallic scrape of a door, not a loose panel. A scrape that had rhythm, that paused, that resumed. Like claws dragging lightly along a surface too hard for them to truly bite. Sarge raised his rifle, eyes scanning. "Contact?" Lead's heart hammered, but her voice stayed controlled. "Hold. Listen." The scrape stopped. A beat. It wasn't a human breath, too deep, too wide, like air passing through a throat built for something else. Doc's whisper barely moved his mask. "That's close." Switch's eyes were fixed on the vent grill overhead. "Please tell me that's not in the vents." Breach shook his head once, slow. "Nothing that big fits in there." The exhale came again, and this time it carried a faint sound underneath it, like a clicking flex of cartilage or teeth settling. Lead forced herself to move. Standing still was how you got mapped. "Go," she said. They rounded the corner and found the security station. It was a glass-fronted booth with a counter, monitors, and a rack of ID cards hanging on hooks, like a normal facility. Normal until you saw the booth's interior. The chair was overturned. The monitors were shattered from the inside out, as if someone had slammed a head into them repeatedly until the glass gave up. A smear of blood ran down the console, thick and dark. And on the floor, near the door that led into the booth, was a man in a lab coat. Or what was left enough to be called a man. His body lay folded wrong, like a puppet dropped. The lab coat was torn. The suit beneath it, a hazmat undersuit, expensive and reinforced, was peeled open at the torso. His rib cage was empty, not cut open, removed. Doc made a strangled sound, involuntary. He stepped toward the body like his medical training could override horror. Lee grabbed his shoulder. "Doc, no." Doc's eyes were wide, fever bright. "He's been—" "I know," Lead snapped, sharper than she meant. She forced herself to look away from the cavity and focus on what mattered. "Get me a key card. Get me something that opens doors." Switch moved into the booth, rifle angled, careful not to touch too much. He started pulling ID cards off the hooks. "Most of these are generic," he said. "Lab access, maintenance, might—" A sound behind them. Not the scrape now. A thud. Heavy. Close. Sarge pivoted, rifle up. Breach stepped sideways, covering the hall. The corridor behind them was empty. But the air felt wrong, denser, as if it had acquired weight. Lead's eyes fell on the floor. Dust and grime, undisturbed since the facility went dark, was marked now by a track. A three-pronged impression in the dust, too deep for a human boot. It wasn't a clean print. The edges dragged slightly, like the thing that made it had too many joints, too much weight, and moved in a way that didn't fully commit to the ground. The track ended at the corner, like whatever made it had stepped there and then stopped being on the floor. Switch's voice was too loud. Lead? Lead didn't answer. She didn't want to give the corridor her voice. Doc whispered, "It's here." Another thud. This time, above them. Something hit the ceiling panel hard enough that dust sifted down. Sarge's rifle tracked upward. Ceiling! Breach backed out of the booth, eyes scanning overhead. Lead's breath came slow, controlled. She forced words through her throat. Move. Now. They left the security booth behind and pushed down the hall. Fast, but not running, because running made noise, and noise was a dinner bell. A single scream echoed from somewhere deep in the complex. High, human, abruptly cut off. Then, nothing. Switch's face was pale. There's someone alive. Not for long, Sarge muttered. Lead's mind snapped into a new shape. Survivors meant information. Information meant leverage against a building and a thing that didn't care about their rules. Toward the scream, she said. Doc stared at her like she'd lost it. Lead? We're trapped, Lead hissed. Doors won't open. Comms are dead. If there's a human left who knows this place, they're the closest thing we have to a map. Breach's jaw clenched. And bait. Lead didn't deny it. Move! They followed the sound into a section marked Administrative Core. That label would have made sense in a normal lab. Here it felt like a joke. The corridors widened, the floor shifting from grate to composite tile. Doors lined the hall, most sealed. Emergency lights strobed in slow pulses, making everything look like it was moving when it wasn't. Halfway down, they found the source of the scream. A woman lay on the floor beside a sealed door, her back against the wall like she'd slid down and run out of muscle. She wore a security uniform, not a lab coat, black synthetic with hard plates at the joints. Her helmet lay beside her, cracked. Her eyes were open. She was still alive. Doc was moving before Lead could stop him. He dropped beside her, hands already scanning for wounds. The woman's breath came in shallow, wet bursts. Her abdomen was bandaged with a strip of fabric that was soaked through. Underneath, something pulsed with her heartbeat. Lead crouched on the other side, rifle angled down the hall. "Ma'am," Lead said, voice controlled, almost gentle. "We're an inspection team. Can you tell me what happened here?" The woman's eyes flicked to Lead's suit patch. WMD verification. The emblem, a skull over a trefoil, and biohazard symbol. Her mouth twitched. "You're not them," she whispered. "No," Lead said. "We're not. We're stuck in your lockdown. I need a way out. I need a way to lift it." The woman tried to laugh. It came out as a cough, wet and painful. "You turned it on," she rasped. "You idiots. You woke it." Switch flinched at the accusation, but he didn't argue. Doc pressed a hand to the woman's bandage. "You're bleeding internally," he said. "I need to." "No," she whispered, a hard refusal that somehow had authority. "No time." Her eyes went distant for a second, as if she could see the whole facility mapped inside her skull. "Door won't open," Lead said, nodding at the sealed entrance behind her. "Is there a manual override? Key card?" Lead felt cold settle behind her ribs. "Aperture." The woman nodded faintly. "Project name. Not a lab, not a reactor, a mouth." Breach swallowed. You mean the ring. The woman's lips peeled back from her teeth in something like fear. It was supposed to open into nothing, she whispered. A waist pocket, a blind fold. No. Her eyes fluttered. Doc's hand tightened, trying to anchor her. It didn't, she whispered. It opened into somewhere hungry. Lee's voice went quieter, and something came through. The woman's eyes widened, just a flicker of remembered terror. Not a demon, she said, as if correcting someone who'd made a stupid joke once. Not a god, just a predator. It doesn't talk, it doesn't bargain, it eats. A distant scrape echoed down the hall, slow, measured. The woman's gaze snapped to it, her pupils dilated. It's here. Lead looked down the corridor, empty. But her skin knew, her bones knew. Something had entered the same space as them, even if their eyes couldn't pin it yet. Tell me how to close it, Lead said, voice tight. The woman swallowed with effort. Manual sequence, she whispered. They designed it so you can't fake it. Needs 2 points, control in the core and in the chamber. Physical confirmation, human hands. Switch's voice shook. Why? Because, the woman whispered, and it almost sounded like contempt. They didn't trust software not to open it again. Lead's brain raced. So the lockdown won't lift until the aperture is closed. The woman nodded faintly. Lockdown isn't to keep you safe, she rasped. It's to keep it in and to keep witnesses from leaving. Sarge swore softly. Of course. The woman's eyes found Lead again. You can't kill it, she whispered. We tried. Rifles, explosives, fire. It just keeps moving. Lead didn't waste time on false hope. Then we trap it, she said. We close the aperture. We lift the lockdown. We get out. The woman's mouth twitched. You'll need a core key, she whispered. Admin clearance, biometrics, not on those cards. Breach looked at Switch, then back at Lead. We can make a biometric. Lead's gaze dropped to the woman's hand. The woman saw the look and, despite everything, shook her head. No, she whispered. Not mine. Doc's voice went sharp. Stop, There's no time, the woman hissed, sudden strength flaring. Take him. She lifted her chin, nodding toward the sealed door behind her. Who? Lead demanded. Director, she whispered. He's in there. Safe room. He thinks he can outweight it. He's wrong. Lead stared at the sealed door. Is he alive? The woman's eyes flicked away. Probably. It hasn't gotten in there yet. Yet. The scrape down the hall came again. Closer. Lead stood. Sarge, breach! Get that door open. Doc's eyes went wide. Lead's voice cut him off. Doc, keep her alive as long as you can. Switch, with me, we cover. Breach pulled a small charge from his kit, quiet, shaped. He slapped it to the door seam, set the timer to a low, audible tick only their suit mics could catch. Sarge braced, rifle up. The charge popped with a dull cough, more pressure than sound. The door seam split. Breach yanked the manual handle and hauled. The safe room door opened. Inside was a man in a crisp shirt and slacks, his hair still combed like he'd expected a press tour. He held a pistol in both hands, arms rigid with fear. His eyes widened at the sight of armored inspectors. You, he stammered, who the hell are you? Lead stepped in, rifle up, voice cold. WMD inspection, you're coming with us. The man's gaze darted to the bleeding security woman in the hall. His face did something ugly. "No," he said quickly. "No, you don't understand. You need to leave. The facility is locked," Lead snapped. "By your system, your admin clearance. You're our key." His eyes narrowed. "You can't take me out there." A scrape sounded behind them, and in that sound was a promise. Lead leaned in close enough that he could see himself reflected in her visor. "Then you can stay here," she said, "and wait for it to find a way through." His throat bobbed. His eyes flicked to the doorway. "It can't get in." Lead's voice went dead calm. "It got through the laws of physics. You think your door is special?" Switch stepped in, grabbing the director's arm. "We're leaving," Switch said. His tone wasn't cruel. It was simply the voice of someone who decided survival was binary. The director resisted weakly, panic making him stiff. Then a thud hit the ceiling panel above the hall. Dust fell. The security woman made a small, broken sound. The director's resistance vanished. He moved. Doc didn't look up from the woman. His hands were shaking now, not with fear for himself, but with the desperate focus of trying to hold someone together long enough for them to matter. Led met his gaze for a fraction of a second. Doc's voice was hoarse. "She's not coming." The woman's eyes flicked to Lead, and she gave the smallest nod. Permission or resignation. Led swallowed something sharp and turned away. "We come back," she lied, because sometimes lies were the only kindness left. They moved. The director stumbled between Switch and Sarge, sweating. Breach took rear. Lead walked point, rifle up, eyes scanning for movement that didn't match the building. The scrape followed them. Not constant, not frantic. Measure, patient. Like the monster didn't need to rush. Like the lockdown had sealed its prey in a maze, and it had all the time in the world to choose the best corner. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. One led toward Central Core, one toward Lab Wing, one toward Maintenance and Power. Lead stopped. "Switch," she whispered. "We need core control and chamber confirmation. Where's the aperture chamber?" Switch looked to the director. "Tell us." The director's eyes were glassy. "Lower levels," he whispered. "Sub-basement. Beneath the primary lab ring, it's sealed." Sarge's laugh was short and humorless. "Everything's sealed." Lead's mind arranged the map in her head. Core control likely near admin, mid-level. Aperture chamber deeper, near the ring. 2 points, 2 places. She didn't like what that implied. "We stay together," she said, even as the words tasted like a lie. "We go to the core first, get control, then we go down." Breach's voice came low. "And the monster?" Lead didn't answer with anything comforting. "It's already coming." They moved toward Central Core. The core door was another vault seal, thicker than anything else. A biometric pad sat beside it, dark until they approached. It lit up with a blue glow that looked wrong in the red emergency wash. "Present clearance," the pad chimed. Switch shoved the director's hand toward it. "Do it." The director hesitated like a man touching a live wire. Then he pressed his palm down. The pad scanned. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, clearance accepted. Director-level access confirmed. The vault door unlocked with a low rumble. Lead felt relief surge, then immediately felt the trap in it. If the door could open, so could others. If the facility was responding, it was thinking. They entered the core. The room was a circular nerve center. Servers, consoles, a central column of hardware that rose like a spine. Blue status lights pulsed along it in a slow rhythm that felt too much like breathing. Switch went straight to the nearest console, yanking a chair aside. His hands flew. The screens flickered, refusing his touch until the director pressed his thumb to a reader. A list of protocols appeared. Locks, status, alerts. The director stared at the screen like it was accusing him personally. Lead leaned over Switch's shoulder. A line of text blinked near the top. Anomalous presence. Active aperture status. Partially open. Lockdown condition. Unmet. Switch whispered, so the building won't lift until it's closed. The director swallowed. You don't understand what you're asking. If we close it wrong... If you opened it wrong, Lead cut in, voice like steel, and something came through, then you've already done the worst part. The director's face twisted. It was a test, controlled. The aperture vector was... Null, Lead said, recalling the dying security woman. Supposed to go nowhere. The director flinched. Yes. And it went somewhere. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way his eyes avoided the screen was confession. Switch stabbed at the menu. Manual closure sequence requires 2 confirmations. One here, one in chamber. Lead looked at the director. Explain it. The director's voice shook. The system won't accept a remote closure because we were afraid of sabotage. It requires a physical key in the chamber, a mechanical interlock. You have to rotate the iris assembly into alignment and engage the clamp. Breach frowned. Like an airlock wheel. The director nodded. And the clamp only engages if someone is present. It reads body heat and pressure. It's a safety feature. Sarge barked a laugh. So you can't close the mouth unless someone stands in front of it. The director's face went pale. It was designed for technicians, a controlled environment, not a monster, Lead thought. Switch scrolled again. If we do both, lockdown lifts? The director hesitated. It should. Lead leaned in, voice cold. Should isn't good enough. The director's eyes glistened. Nothing about this is good enough. A new sound came through the room. Not a scrape. A click. The core's lights flickered. The consoles stuttered. For a fraction of a second, every screen showed static. Then a single symbol, repeating in a pattern too complex to be a glitch. Switch recoiled. What the hell was that? Doc's voice came through Lead's earpiece. He was still in the hallway with the dying woman. His tone was strained. Lead, I'm seeing something on my external cam. Down the admin corridor. It's moving. Lead's blood iced. Describe it. Doc swallowed audibly. I can't see it clean. It's like the light bends around it, like a shape made of shadow and angles. It's wrong. Then the audio cut for half a second, replaced by a low, wet inhale. Doc's voice came back, sharp. It's coming. Now. Lead didn't waste words. Fall back to us. Now. The director looked up, eyes wild. What is that? That, Sarge said, rifle up, is the consequence of your experiment. They moved toward the corridor. Doc stumbled in, half dragging the security woman's helmet. No, not her helmet. He came in alone. His face was slick with sweat. His eyes were haunted. Lead's gaze flicked past him. Where? Doc's mouth worked. He couldn't make the sentence. He just shook his head. Lead didn't ask again. The lies she'd told died without ceremony. The scrape came from the hall. Closer, slower. Like it knew where they were now. Like it liked the way fear tightened voices and made lungs work harder. Sarge slammed the corridor controls. Can we seal ourselves in? Switch barked. Not if we want out. Breach looked at Lead. We close the aperture. Doors unlock. That's the only way out of lockdown. Lead nodded. Then we go down. The director made a noise like protest. You can't take me down there. Lead stepped close. Then you can die here. He stared at her, truly stared, like he'd expected the people sent to inspect weapons to have rules about cruelty. Then he nodded, shaking. Switch grabbed a data stick from his kit and jammed it into the console. "I'm pulling what I can," he said fast. "Logs, project data, anything that proves what this place is." Lead snapped. "Now?" Switch's eyes were hard. "If we die, someone needs to know why." Lead hated him for being right. Breach leaned out the corridor, rifle angled. "Movement," he hissed. Lead stepped beside him. The corridor outside was empty, but the emergency lights in the hall pulsed as if they were being dimmed by a passing shadow. Like something big moved between the lights and the world. A low sound drifted down the hall, not loud enough to be a roar, but deep enough to vibrate in ribs. A hunting sound. Then, at the far end of the corridor, where the red light was weakest, the darkness moved. It unfolded. Not stepping into the light, more like the light refused to commit to touching it. A shape came forward, tall, jointed, its silhouette not quite matching the corridor geometry. It moved with the careful confidence of something that knew it was faster than fear. Lead saw it for less than a second. That was enough. It had limbs, too many angles. It had a head, wrongly narrow. It had a mouth, an opening that didn't reflect light so much as swallow it. And it had a smell that hit even through filters. Sour, metallic, like wet stone and old meat. Sarge fired first. The muzzle flash lit the corridor in white, strobing bursts. The rounds hit the creature's front, if it had a front, and sparked off something hard. The creature didn't flinch. It surged forward, a rush of impossible speed that turned the corridor into a closing throat. Lead fired, breach fired, switch fired one panic burst, then ducked behind the doorframe. Bullets struck, sparks, shreds of dark fluid that didn't spray so much as evaporate into a mist that made Lead's eyes water. The creature hit the doorway. It didn't ram like an animal. It reached. A limb snapped out, not toward the rifles, but toward the nearest warm thing. The director screamed. The limb caught him around the torso with terrifying precision, hooking under his ribs. He vanished out of the doorway like a toy yanked away. His scream cut off mid-note. Lead lunged forward instinctively. Too late. The creature retreated just as fast, dragging the director down the corridor. The red light stuttered around them. For one moment, Lead saw the director's hands clawing at the floor, fingernails shredding. Then he was gone around the corner. Silence crashed down. Switch's voice was thin. "It took him." Doc swallowed. "That was our key." Lead's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "Not the only key." Breach's eyes were fixed down the hall. "You heard him. The chamber needs physical presence. The core needs clearance. If he's gone..." Switch's fingers flew on his tablet. "I pulled his credential token when he was at the console," he said. "It's a soft key cached on the system. If I can spoof..." Lee didn't have time for theory. "Do it." Switch wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. "I can spoof his clearance locally as long as the system doesn't re-authenticate." Sarge's mouth twisted. "If it does?" Switch didn't answer. Lead's voice went low. "Then we brute force." Breach nodded once. Down to the chamber. Doc looked at the corridor where the director had vanished. "It's hunting now." Lead's gaze was cold. "It was always hunting. We just finally walked into its line." Switch pulled the map from the system. Partial, fragmented, but enough. "Aperture chamber is sub-basement," he said, pointing to a schematic. "We take the service stairwell past the lab ring." Lead nodded. "Move." They left the core. They did not go the way the creature had gone. As they descended, the building's hum deepened. The air grew colder and drier, as if they were leaving human space behind and entering something built for machines. Halfway down, Switch's radio popped with a burst of static that almost sounded like speech. Sarge flinched. "Comms are still dead," Doc murmured. "Not dead, just dirty." Lee didn't like that. "Ignore it." They reached the lab ring again, where the ring apparatus sat silent and waiting behind glass. As they passed, the ring's crystal nodes flickered. Once, a faint blue pulse, like a heartbeat. Switch froze. That wasn't powered before. Breach grabbed his harness. "Keep moving." The ring pulsed again. The air in the corridor shivered. Lead felt pressure in her teeth, like a storm building. The facility's voice came overhead. "Aperture stabilization active." Switch whispered, "It's waking the weapon." Doc's voice shook. "Because it wants it open." Lee didn't ask who it was. The building, the monster, the collision of the two. It didn't matter. The effect was the same. The mouth was opening again, somewhere below, and the monster had come through once. It didn't need permission to do it again. They moved faster. The service stairwell ended at a reinforced door marked "Aperture Chamber Access Authorized Personnel Only." The door was sealed. A biometric reader blinked. Switch stepped up, plugged in his tablet, and began spoofing the director's cached credentials. The reader flashed blue, then red. "Denied," it chirped. Switch's hands shook. "It's re-authenticating. It wants a live token." Sarge slammed his fist into the wall. "We don't have time for this." Breach pulled his last shape charge. "Then we do it loud." Lead hesitated. Charges in a facility like this were a gamble. If they compromised the wrong conduit, they could ignite something worse than a monster. But behind them, somewhere above, a distant thud sounded, heavy, deliberate. It was coming down the stairs, one slow impact at a time. Not rushing, never rushing. The monster understood something humans didn't. Panic did half the killing for you. "Do it," Lead said. Breach set the charge low on the hinge line, angled to blow the lock rather than the frame. He looked at Lead. "Cover your ears, or don't, doesn't matter." The charge went. The door jumped, twisted, and fell inward with a groan. Cold air spilled out. Not stone cold, sterile cold, like a freezer that had never been opened. They stepped through. The aperture chamber was bigger than any lab bay above. It was a cathedral built for a single purpose. The ring was here, larger, nested into a floor assembly. Conduits like ribs arched overhead, feeding into the ring's supports. Banks of capacitors lined the walls like organs waiting to be shocked awake. And at the center, suspended within the ring, was something that made Lead's mind refuse for half a second. A gap. Not empty space. A hole. The air within it looked wrong. Light bent around it in a subtle curl. The edges shimmered with a faint, blue-white corona, like the surface of water catching moonlight. Except it wasn't water, and it wasn't light reflecting. It was reality thinning. The hole wasn't fully open. It was a narrow oval, like an eye half-lidded. And behind it, darkness. Not darkness like a room unlit. A darkness that had depth. A place, Doc whispered. That's where it came from. Switch's voice was a thin thread. They did this on purpose. Breach stared at the hole with a soldier's direct hatred. And they lost control. A console station stood near the ring, its screen flickering with warning icons. A mechanical assembly, an iris clamp, sat at the ring's edge, a heavy wheel and locking dogs like a vault latch. Lead remembered the security woman's words. Human hands, body heat, pressure, a safety feature that had become a guillotine requirement. Switch ran to the console. I can initiate closure from here, he said, fingers flying, but it's waiting on physical clamp confirmation. Sarge looked at the iris wheel. That's our second point. Lead's throat tightened. How long does closure take? Switch swallowed. 2 minutes, maybe 3. It has to bleed the field down without ripping the whole chamber apart. Breach's eyes flicked to the doorway behind them. And the monster? As if summoned by the name they weren't giving it, the chamber lights flickered. A thud echoed in the stairwell outside. Closer. Then another. The sound of claws on metal, soft but unmistakable, dragged along the hallway beyond the door. Sarge's voice went low. It followed. Lead's mind snapped into a plan that felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping the math held. We close the aperture, she said. We lift lockdown. We run. Switch's fingers paused. The system will only lift if it reads anomaly neutralized. Lead looked at the hole. Then we make it neutral. Breach frowned. How? Lead's eyes went to the hole again, to the half-open mouth. We lure it, she said. Doc's eyes widened. Lead. We can't kill it, Lead snapped. We've seen that. So we don't fight it. We feed it a path. Sarge stared at her. You want to bait it into the hole? Lead didn't answer with words. Her gaze did. Breach exhaled slowly. That's insane. Everything about this place is insane, Lead said, but the monster wants the mouth. It came through it. It's hunting around it like it knows it matters. Switch's face was pale. If we open the aperture more, we risk. Lead nodded once. So we don't open it more than we have to. We keep it narrow. We pull it close. We make it take one step too far. Breach's hand tightened on his rifle. And what if it doesn't? Lead met his gaze. Then we die down here anyway. The thud outside grew louder. The monster wasn't rushing, but it wasn't stopping either. Switch swallowed. I can start the sequence, but the clamp, someone has to engage it and hold it until the system reads physical confirmation. It's a manual wheel. It won't stay without pressure. Sarge looked at the wheel, then at Lead, then at Breach. His eyes were calculating. So one of us stands there and cranks while the monster comes in. Lead's voice softened by a fraction. Yes. Doc shook his head. No, we can rig. Breach cut him off. You can rig a lot of things, he said quietly, but you can't rig time. Switch looked at the console. If the clamp disengages even for a second, the system aborts. It will try to restabilize. It might even open wider to compensate. Lead felt the room tighten around that. A mouth that widens when you flinch. Sarge spoke first. We do it. Doc's eyes flashed. We do it, and someone dies. Sarge looked at him. We do it, and maybe the rest live. Silence. Then, in that silence, the door to the chamber began to vibrate. Not from the building, from impact. A gentle pressure at first, like something leaning in. Then hard. The door groaned. Switch's hands moved on instinct. I'm starting the closure sequence, he said. Now. The console chimed. The ring's nodes brightened, shifting from blue to a harsh white. The air around the hole shivered. The corona tightened. The hole pulsed. Lead felt her vision blur at the edges, like the world didn't want to be looked at too hard. The door behind them boomed, one hard impact. Metal buckled inward a fraction. Breach raised his rifle, planting himself between the door and the others. On me, he said. Sarge moved to the iris wheel. He put both hands on it and began to crank. The wheel resisted like it hadn't moved in months. He grunted, muscles straining. Doc grabbed Sarge's harness. Don't be stupid, he hissed. Sarge didn't look back. I'm being practical. Switch's voice went fast. Field bleed in progress, 2 minutes. Lead's eyes tracked the hole. It tightened slightly, the oval narrowing by a hair. The corona flickered. The door boomed again. A seam split. Cold air from the hall rushed in. And with it came the smell, sour, metallic, wet stone. The monster was right outside. Breach fired through the splitting seam, blind shots meant to buy seconds. The bullets sparked off the doorframe, ricocheted. The sound was deafening in the chamber. The door shuddered. Then it bowed inward as something pushed against it from the other side with patient strength. Lead's mouth went dry. Hold. Breach planted his boot against the door, bracing. I'm holding. The door buckled more. A clawed limb, black, jointed, slipped through the gap like a finger probing a wound. It flexed. Metal squealed as claws dug in. Breach fired point blank at the limb. The impact shredded something dark and viscous. The limb withdrew, then snapped back in, harder, angrier. A new sound came with it, a low rumble that wasn't pain, but irritation. Like a predator annoyed its prey, had teeth. Sarge kept cranking the wheel, sweat on his face, jaw clenched. Switch shouted over the noise, "Clamp requires continuous pressure. Don't stop." Doc's hands hovered near Sarge's back, like he wanted to physically hold him there. Lead's gaze flicked to the hole again. It narrowed another fraction. Not enough. "Switch," Lead said, voice tight. "Can you accelerate bleed?" Switch's hands flew. "If I accelerate, I destabilize. If it collapses wrong..." The monster hit the door again, and this time the door's hinge line screamed. Breach's boot slipped. He swore, firing again. The door tore open another inch. The limb that came through wasn't a probing finger now. It was a full, arm-like structure, jointed wrong, ending in claws built for grabbing. It latched onto the doorframe and pulled. Metal ripped. The door opened enough for a head to appear. Lead saw it clearly for the first time. A narrow, skull-like shape, not bone but something else. Hard, glossy, wet with its own condensation. No eyes she could recognize, but recessed hollows where something moved beneath. A mouth that was not lips, but a vertical split lined with pale, hooked teeth that looked like they didn't belong on any evolutionary tree that made sense. It exhaled. The sound vibrated through the chamber and made the ring's lights flicker. Breach fired into its head. The bullet struck and sparked. Dark fluid splattered, then the head snapped back, retreating, only to surge forward again with renewed aggression. It wasn't fear. It was anger. Lead's voice went cold. "It doesn't care." Doc whispered, "It never did." The monster's limb lashed out through the opening and caught Breach's rifle barrel. It yanked with brutal strength. Breach tried to hold, his arms strained. The rifle jerked, twisting. Then the monster yanked again. Breach flew forward into the doorway. Lead lunged, grabbing his harness. Sarge yelled, "No!" Breach's boots scraped the floor. He dug in, trying to resist. The monster's claws hooked Breach's armor plates and pulled. For a second, Breach was halfway through the door, his body arched, face turned toward Lead, eyes wide. "Cut me loose!" he shouted. Lead's fingers fumbled at his harness clip. Doc grabbed too, trying to help. The monster pulled harder. Breach's scream cut through the chamber, not because of pain, because of panic. His armor creaked. Something snapped. A strap broke. The monster got him. In one violent motion, it yanked Breach out of Lead's grasp and into the hall. Lead staggered forward, hands empty, breath knocked out. Breach's scream was cut short by a wet sound that made Doc retch. The door slammed again, not because the monster closed it, but because it hid it while dragging its meal away. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the sound of chewing began. Not loud, not theatrical. A wet, crunching rhythm that made Leeds' stomach turn into ice. Sarge's hands on the wheel shook, but he didn't stop cranking. Switch's voice was a broken whisper. 1 minute. Doc stared at the door as if his mind refused to accept the reality that Breach had been there and now wasn't. Lead forced herself to turn away. "Switch," she snapped, voice trembling with effort. 1 minute is too long. Switch's eyes were wide, haunted. It's physics. Lead looked at Sarge, cranking, body braced. "Keep going," she said. Sarge nodded, jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might break. The door shook again. The chewing stopped. A slow scrape began. Closer. The monster was coming back. Not satiated. Just continuing. Doc's voice came out thin. "It's not done." Sarge snarled, "I'm not done either." The hole narrowed again, the corona tightening like a noose. The air in the chamber grew colder. A pressure built in Leeds' ears like descending in an elevator too fast. Switch's fingers flew. His face had gone slack with focus. 30 seconds, he said. The door shuddered. A claw slipped through the split seam again, probing. Sarge's hands tightened on the wheel. "Switch," Leeds said, making a decision she hated. "When it hits 0, you go. You run for the exit path. You do not look back." Switch looked at her, eyes wet. "What about—" Lead didn't let him finish. "Go." Doc stared at Lead. "No, we go together." Lead's voice dropped. "The clamp needs hands. The sequence needs someone to finish it." Doc's eyes flicked to Sarge at the wheel. "He's doing it." Lead nodded. "And he's going to keep doing it." Sarge didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His entire body was commitment now. Switch shouted, 10 seconds. The monster hit the door again, harder, and the seam widened. A head appeared in the gap, teeth gleaming. Lead fired into it, not to kill, but to make it hesitate. The monster recoiled half an inch, more irritation than retreat. Switch yelled, "Clamp confirmation in 3." Sarge's hands turned the wheel the last quarter rotation. A heavy, locking dog clunked into place. The iris clamp engaged with a sound like a vault ceiling. Switch slapped the console. "Confirmation, now." The ring flared white. The hole shrank abruptly, the corona snapping inward like a tightening lens. The chamber's air rushed toward the hole, not as wind, but as pressure reorganizing. Loose dust lifted off the floor and streamed toward the gap in a slow spiral. The monster paused in the doorway, as if it felt the pull. Its head tilted, its claws tightened on the frame. For the first time, it looked uncertain. Not afraid, just recalculating. Switch screamed, "Collapse in progress! Don't break the clamp!" The monster lunged. Not toward the hole, toward the clamp, toward the human hands holding it. Sarge saw it and did the one thing Lead would remember forever. He stepped forward. He put his shoulder against the clamp wheel and held. And he turned his head enough to look at Lead. Through the red light, through the strobing white corona, his eyes were clear. "Go," he said. Doc's voice broke. "Sarge." Sarge didn't look at him. "Doc, go." Lead's throat tightened so hard she couldn't speak. She grabbed Doc's harness and yanked him back. Switch was already backing away, clutching the data stick like a prayer. The monster struck the clamp area. Its claw slammed into Sarge's shoulder plate. Sarge grunted, teeth clenched, refusing to move. The monster's other limb hooked around him, trying to pull him away from the wheel. Sarge's boots scraped. He dug in, body shaking. He held. The ring's light flared brighter. The hole narrowed to a slit. The pressure in the room spiked, making Lead's suit seals groan. Switch yelled, "If it loses pressure now, it'll tear. Run!" Lead dragged Doc. Switch ran. They sprinted toward the stairwell door, boots hammering the floor. Behind them, Sarge's voice came through the comms, ragged, furious. "Come on," he snarled, to the monster or to the universe. "Come on!" The monster made a sound then, not a roar, not speech. A deep, furious vibration that shook the chamber. Lead didn't look back. She couldn't. She hit the stairwell, slammed into the doorframe, nearly fell down the first steps. Switch was already halfway down, moving like his fear had become a motor. Doc stumbled, then caught himself, panting. Behind them, the chamber light flickered. A deep whump sound rolled through the facility. Not an explosion, but a pressure event, like a lung collapsing. Then, silence. Not the earlier hush, a thicker, deeper silence. The facility's voice returned. Aperture status closed. Lead's heart hammered. Anomalous presence contained. A pause. Lockdown condition met. Facility doors unlocking. Somewhere above, heavy mechanisms began to move. Locks releasing. Doors cycling. Switch sobbed once, a sound he clearly hated making. He wiped at his eyes with his glove and kept moving. Doc's voice was hoarse. "Sarge!" Lead swallowed hard. "He did it." Doc shook his head, denial, desperate. "No, he—" Lead cut him off because she couldn't bear it either. "Move!" They ran. Doors that had been sealed now flashed green. Some were still slow to respond, systems sluggish after months of dormancy, but they were opening. They hit the lab ring corridor, and it was alive now. Lights flickering, vents shifting, the hum changing pitch like the building was trying to rebalance after holding its breath. As they passed the lab bay window, the ring apparatus behind glass was dark again. But the floor in that lab, where the gouge had been, was different. The gouge was gone. Not repaired, not filled, just absent. Lead didn't stop to understand. She didn't want to. They reached the upper admin corridors and found the security booth again. The blood smear was still there. The booth still empty of breach. The director's ID rack still swayed slightly from earlier movement, like the building was gently mocking the concept of normal. They passed the hall where the security woman had been. Doc slowed, reflexive, turning his head. The corridor was empty. No body. No blood pool. Just a faint smear on the floor, leading toward a corner. Doc's voice broke. "No." Lead grabbed his arm. "Doc, she's gone." He stared at the smear like he could reverse time by refusing to accept it. Switch's voice was raw. "We're not staying." A door ahead opened into the facility's main entry bay. Cold outside air hit them like a slap. For the first time since they'd entered, they saw the world beyond the compound again. Gray sky, wind across scrub, the hard line of the horizon. Freedom looked painfully ordinary. They ran for it. The last obstacle was the vehicle bay's outer blast door. It was half open, jammed by debris. The door had tried to cycle, and something had prevented full travel. Switch shoved his hands under the edge and pushed. His arms shook. He screamed with effort. Doc joined him. Lead joined him. The door creaked upward another foot. Enough. They dove under. Outside, the wind hit their faces, cold and real. The facility behind them breathed out heat like a sick animal. They didn't stop running until they'd cleared the perimeter fencing and hit the rocky wash where their transport had been staged. Their truck sat where they'd left it. The driver, an external contractor they'd brought to get them to the site, was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. Lead's stomach dropped. She yanked the door open. The driver's eyes stared at nothing. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His chest was caved, not crushed by blunt force, hollowed. Doc made a sound that wasn't language. Switch staggered back. How? We left him outside. Lead's eyes snapped to the facility. The monster had been inside. Contained. But containment did not mean it hadn't reached out, or that something else hadn't. Lead's radio crackled suddenly, clean now, almost cheerful. Cinder team, this is Overwatch. We have your last telemetry. Confirm status. Lead stared at the radio like it was an insult. Then she forced her voice to work. Overwatch, this is Lead. We are outside. 2 KIA, 1 missing. Facility breach. Exotic energy. Containment event. Hostile entity. Repeat, hostile entity. We need immediate extraction and quarantine. A pause. Overwatch's tone shifted, suddenly very careful. Copy, Lead. Maintain position. Extraction inbound. Do not re-enter. Do not approach the facility. Repeat, do not approach. Lead looked back at the compound. The main building's lights flickered, then steadied. For a moment, everything looked normal again, just concrete and steel in a lonely landscape. And then the ground under the facility shuddered. Not an explosion, a settling. A slow collapse, like something beneath the foundation had been eaten away. The facility sank an inch, then another. The perimeter fence warped. Concrete cracked in spiderweb lines that spread with quiet inevitability. Switch whispered, "It's collapsing." Doc's face was gray. "Sarge." Lead didn't answer. She couldn't. The words would make it final. The facility speakers, still live, broadcast one last message into the open air, tinny but clear. Containment protocol complete. Manual operator unaccounted. Lead's throat tightened. The ground buckled again. The facility sank further, the front entryway dipping as if bowing. A tremor ran through the earth and up through Lead's boots. Then it stopped. The compound held, cracked and sunken, like a mouth that had clenched shut on something too big to swallow. Overhead, the distant thump of rotors approached. Rescue, or cleanup, or both. Switch looked at Lead, eyes wet. "We did it," he whispered, like he needed to hear it out loud. Lead stared at the facility and felt the weight of the cost press into her lungs. "We closed the mouth," she said. Doc shook his head slowly and left a man holding it shut. A helicopter crested the ridgeline, black against the sky, moving fast. No markings, of course. As it descended, the wind from its rotors whipped dust into spirals around them. Lead kept her rifle lowered, but she didn't relax. Not yet. Because the last thing the security woman had said hadn't been about the monster. It had been about the lockdown keeping witnesses from leaving. The helicopter's skids touched down. A side door slid open. Men in sealed suits stepped out. No insignia, no faces. One raised a hand in a "come here" gesture that wasn't an invitation so much as a command. A voice came through an external speaker, filtered and flat. Switch flinched, angry. "We're not prisoners." Lead looked at the facility again, sunken, sealed, silent. She remembered the monster's weight on the door, the way it had moved like certainty. She remembered Sarge's eyes when he said go. And she understood, with sudden clarity, that what they'd survived wasn't the story. What happened after was... Lead turned to Doc and Switch. Her voice was steady because if it wasn't, they'd break. "Board," she said. Doc's hands shook as he climbed into the helicopter. Switch followed, still clutching the data stick like it was proof the universe couldn't erase. Lead climbed last. As the door slid shut and the helicopter lifted, She looked down through the small window at the facility receding beneath them. Cracked concrete, warped fencing, a silent mouth. And somewhere under that collapsed roofline, a man holding a wheel in a chamber of white light, alone with the certainty that the monster had wanted to open reality, and now reality had wanted to close over him. The helicopter banked away. The facility shrank to a scar in the landscape. Lead told herself they'd trapped it. She told herself Sarge's sacrifice meant something. She told herself the hole was closed. But as the compound became a dot, a single flicker of light pulsed at its center, faint, blue-white, like a heartbeat. And the radio on Lead's suit, still active, still carrying the facility's mesh, popped once with a soft hiss. Then, buried deep under the static, came a sound she hadn't heard since the chamber. A low, wet inhale. Patient. Unhurried.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.